Detective Maria Santos pulled her unmarked sedan into the driveway of 1247 Maple Street, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp October morning air. The Henderson family's colonial home looked deceptively peaceful from the outside. White picket fence, manicured lawn, cheerful yellow shutters that suggested nothing more sinister than weekend barbecues and children's birthday parties. But Maria knew better than to trust appearances. After 15 years on the Portland police force, she'd learned that the worst crimes often hid behind the most ordinary facades. The first thing that struck her as she approached the front door was the silence. No birds chirped in the towering oak trees, no dogs barked from neighboring yards. It was as if the entire street held its breath, waiting for something terrible to be acknowledged. Maria's partner, Detective Tom Bradley, emerged from his car with a grim expression, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by the focused intensity that marked serious cases. "What do we know?" Maria asked, pulling on latex gloves as they walked up the brick pathway. "Break-in occurred 2 nights ago, around 2 a.m., Tom replied, consulting his notepad. Family was out of town for a wedding parents and older son. Only the 3-year-old daughter Emma and her babysitter Stephanie Walsh were home. Stephanie's 19, college student, been watching Emma for about 6 months. Maria nodded, her detective's mind already cataloging questions. Forced entry? Back door. Pried open with what looks like a crowbar. Perp knew exactly what he was looking for, went straight for the master bedroom, home office, and living room entertainment center. Took electronics, jewelry, about $15,000 worth of goods, according to the initial estimate. As they reached the front door, it opened before they could knock. A woman in her mid-30s, with disheveled auburn hair and red-rimmed eyes, appeared. Jennifer Henderson looked like she hadn't slept in days, her clothes wrinkled, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured them inside. "Detectives, thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you've already been working the case, but Emma... She's still not talking. Dr. Martinez at Children's Hospital said sometimes a child psychologist working with law enforcement can help, but Emma won't even let strangers near her." Maria stepped into the foyer and immediately felt the weight of violation that lingered in burglarized homes. Even though the obvious damage had been cleaned up, she could sense the family's shattered sense of security in the way Jennifer's eyes darted nervously to the windows, in the new deadbolt lock that looked hastily installed on the front door. "Mrs. Henderson, I know this is difficult, but I need to see Emma. Sometimes children remember details that adults miss, and those details could be crucial to catching whoever did this." Jennifer led them through the living room, where Maria noted the empty entertainment center, the subtle rectangles of clean carpet where stolen electronics had once sat. Family photos remained untouched on the mantelpiece, smiling images of the Hendersons at various stages of their lives, before this violation had changed everything. They found Emma in the kitchen, sitting at a small table designed for children, a coloring book open in front of her. But the crayons lay scattered and unused. The little girl had her back pressed against her chair, as if trying to disappear into it, her wide blue eyes fixed on something only she could see. Her blonde hair, usually kept in neat pigtails according to the family photos, hung limp and tangled around her pale face. "Emma, sweetheart," Jennifer said softly, kneeling beside her daughter's chair. "These are the police officers I told you about. They want to help us find the bad man." Emma's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She shrank further into her chair, her small hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She didn't look at the detectives, didn't acknowledge their presence at all. Instead, she began a slight rocking motion, back and forth, a self-soothing behavior Maria had seen in other traumatized children. Maria approached slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She'd worked with child victims before, and knew that patience was more valuable than any interrogation technique. Pulling up an adult-sized chair, she sat down at Emma's eye level, careful not to invade the child's personal space. "Hi, Emma," Maria said gently. "My name's Maria. I'm here because I want to make sure you feel safe again." No response. Emma's rocking continued, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the kitchen window where a bird feeder swayed gently in the morning breeze. Tom cleared his throat softly. "Mrs. Henderson, can you walk us through what happened that night?" From Emma's perspective, Jennifer's face crumpled slightly, but she composed herself with visible effort. Stephanie was babysitting. Emma was asleep in her room upstairs. Around 2 in the morning, Stephanie heard noises downstairs. She called out, thinking, maybe David and I had come home early from the wedding. When she didn't get an answer, she got scared and went to check on Emma. Maria noticed Emma's rocking had intensified at the mention of that night. Stephanie grabbed Emma from her bed and hid them both in Emma's bedroom closet. Jennifer continued. She had her phone and called 911, but she was whispering so the intruder wouldn't hear them. Emma was awake by then, confused and scared. Stephanie kept her quiet, but Jennifer glanced at her daughter, then back at the detectives. But Emma kept trying to peek out through the closet slats. Stephanie said she couldn't stop her. Emma saw him. Maria felt her pulse quicken. An eyewitness, even a 3-year-old one, could be invaluable. Did Stephanie see the intruder? Just a glimpse when he passed by the bedroom doorway. She said he had a flashlight, was tall, but that's all she could tell. She was focused on keeping Emma quiet and safe. Maria turned back to Emma, who had stopped rocking and was now staring directly at her for the first time. The child's eyes held an intelligence that seemed far older than her years, as if trauma had accelerated some part of her development while freezing others. "Emma," Maria said softly, "I know you saw something scary, but you're safe now. Your mommy and daddy are here, and we're going to catch the bad man. Would it help if we brought a friend to visit you? A very special friend who helps scared children. Feel better?" For just a moment, Maria thought she saw a flicker of interest in Emma's eyes. Then the little girl looked away again, but this time she didn't resume her rocking. It was progress, however small. Maria exchanged a meaningful look with Tom. They both knew that Emma Henderson held the key to solving this case. The question was whether they could find a way to help her unlock the traumatic memories trapped inside her young mind, and whether those memories would lead them to justice or deeper into a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. The interrogation room at Portland Police's Central Precinct felt smaller than its actual 8x10 dimensions. The fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows that made everyone look guilty of something. Marcus Webb sat hunched over the metal table, his wrists still bearing red marks from the handcuffs that had been removed only minutes earlier. At 28, he carried himself with the wary posture of someone who'd spent too much time looking over his shoulder. But today, his usual street-smart confidence had crumbled into something approaching panic. Detective Tom Bradley slid a manila folder across the table, its contents spilling out like an accusation. Crime scene photos, fingerprint analysis sheets, and a mugshot lineup that included Marcus's weathered face among 5 similar-looking men. The evidence was damning, laid out with the precision of a prosecutor's closing argument. "Your prints are all over the Hendersons' back door, Marcus," Detective Santos said, settling into the chair across from him. She kept her voice neutral, professional, but her dark eyes studied his every micro-expression with the intensity of a scientist, examining specimens under a microscope. "Want to tell us how they got there?" Marcus ran his hands through his unkempt brown hair, leaving it sticking up at odd angles. His blue work shirt, stained with paint and plaster dust, suggested he'd been pulled away from a construction job. "When they arrested him, I told you already," he said, his voice hoarse from hours of questioning. I knocked on their door last week, maybe the week before, looking for work. I do handyman stuff, odd jobs around the neighborhood. Convenient, Bradley muttered, making notes on a yellow legal pad. And I suppose you just happened to case the joint while you were there asking about work. I didn't case nothing. Marcus's voice cracked with desperation, his Midwest accent becoming more pronounced under stress. I needed money, yeah, but I wasn't planning to rob nobody. I just wanted honest work. Santos opened the folder and pulled out a photograph of the Hendersons' ransacked bedroom. Jewelry boxes emptied, dresser drawers pulled out and overturned. $15,000 in electronics and jewelry, Marcus. That's a lot of honest work. How much were you planning to charge for fixing their gutters? The public defender assigned to Marcus's case, Sarah Chun, was a small woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd been defending indigent clients for 6 years and had developed a sixth sense for when her clients were telling the truth. Something about Marcus Webb's desperation felt authentic, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. My client has already explained his presence at the Henderson residence, Sean interjected. He was canvassing the neighborhood for legitimate employment opportunities. The fact that he later knocked on their door doesn't make him a burglar. Santos pulled out another photograph, this one from a neighbor's security camera, showing Marcus walking down Maple Street at 11:47 p.m. on the night of the burglary. The timestamp glowed green in the corner, like a digital verdict. This puts you in the neighborhood at the right time, Marcus. What were you doing there almost at midnight? Marcus's face went pale as he stared at the image. That ... that can't be right. I was with Tanya that night. We were watching movies at her place. But even as he said it, uncertainty flickered across his features. Tanya Rodriguez? Bradley consulted his notes. Your girlfriend who initially told our officers she hadn't seen you that night? The same Tanya who changed her story after we pressed her about your parole violations. The room fell silent, except for the hem of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the police station ringing phones, muffled conversations, the electronic beep of the security door opening and closing. Marcus looked between the two detectives, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. She was scared, Marcus said finally. I wasn't supposed to be at her place after 10 p.m. because of my parole conditions. She thought she was protecting me by lying. But when you told her I might go down for burglary, she told you the truth. Santos leaned back in her chair, studying Marcus with the analytical gaze that had made her one of Portland's most successful detectives. In her 15 years on the force, she'd interviewed hundreds of suspects, and she'd learned to read the subtle signs that distinguish genuine fear from performed innocence. Marcus Webb exhibited all the physiological markers of someone telling. The truth-dilated pupils, increased respiration, micro-expressions that couldn't be faked yet, the evidence against him was ironclad. Here's what bothers me, Marcus, she said slowly. Your story keeps changing. First you said you'd never been to the Henderson house. Then you admitted you'd been there looking for work. Now you're saying your girlfriend lied to protect you from a parole violation. How many versions of the truth are you going to give us? I'm not lying. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, causing Sarah Chon to place a restraining hand on his arm. Look, I know how this looks. I know my record makes me look guilty. But I swear on my mother's grave, I didn't break into that house. I needed money. Yeah, but I was trying to get it the right way this time. Bradley pulled out a file containing Marcus's criminal history, 3 prior burglary convictions, 2 counts of breaking and entering, a handful of drug possession charges that painted the picture of a man who'd made poor choices consistently throughout his adult life. The right way? Like when you broke into the Patterson house in 2019, or the Nguyen family in 2021? You seem to have a pattern of targeting suburban families, Marcus. That was different, Marcus protested. I was using back then. I've been clean for 18 months. I go to NAA meetings 3 times a week. Ask my sponsor. Ask my parole officer. I've been trying to turn my life around. Sarah Chun made a note on her legal pad, recognizing a potential character witness. But she also knew that rehabilitation stories rarely swayed juries when faced with compelling physical evidence. The fingerprints alone would be nearly impossible to explain away. Detective Santos, John said, unless you're prepared to formally charge my client. I think this interview has gone on long enough. Mr. Webb has been cooperative and has answered your questions repeatedly. The fact that his girlfriend initially lied to protect him from a technical parole violation doesn't make him guilty of burglary. Santos gathered the photographs back into the manila folder, but her eyes remained fixed on Marcus. Something nagged at her about this case, a detail that didn't quite fit. An instinct honed by years of police work that whispered this might not be as straightforward as it appeared. Marcus, she said finally, is there anything else you can tell us about that night? Anyone who might have seen you with Tanya? Any receipts? Any other proof that you were where you say you were? Marcus's shoulders sagged with defeat. We ordered pizza around 9 o'clock. Paid cash. Watched some Netflix show about serial killers. Tanya fell asleep around 11, and I stayed until morning, but I can't prove none of that. As Santos and Bradley left the interrogation room, the weight of the case settled around them like a familiar coat. The evidence was solid. The suspect had means and opportunity, and his criminal history suggested a pattern of behavior. It should have felt like closure. Instead, Detective Santos found herself staring at Marcus Webb's photograph, wondering why solving this case felt less like justice and more like something was slipping through her fingers. Officer Jake Mueller had been partnered with Rex for 3 years, but their bond felt like it had been forged over decades. The 4-year-old German Shepherd possessed an almost supernatural ability to read human emotions, his deep brown eyes reflecting an intelligence that went far beyond typical canine instincts. Rex wasn't just trained for drug detection and suspect apprehension. He was certified in trauma therapy, crisis response, and victim assistance, making him one of only 12 dogs in Oregon with such specialized training. As Mueller's unmarked patrol car turned onto Maple Street, Rex sat alert in the specially designed rear compartment, his ears perked forward with anticipation. He could sense they were heading into a situation that would require his gentlest skills rather than his law enforcement training. Mueller had briefed him during the drive, not that Rex understood words like traumatized child or witness protection, but he recognized the tone that meant he'd need to be especially careful, especially patient. Remember, boy, Mueller said softly as he parked outside the Henderson home. This little girl has been through something terrible. We're going to let her set the pace, okay? Rex's response was a soft whine of understanding, his tail wagging just enough to show he was ready, but not so enthusiastically as to appear overwhelming. Mueller had requested this assignment specifically after Detective Santos mentioned the silent witness. In his 5 years with the Portland police, he'd seen Rex work magic with trauma victims. Something about the dog's calm presence seemed to unlock doors that traditional therapy couldn't reach. Dr. Amanda Torres was already waiting on the Hendersons' front porch when they arrived. The child psychologist was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair that she wore in a practical bun. She'd been working with traumatized children for over 15 years and had collaborated with the police canine unit on several previous cases. Her initial assessment of Emma Henderson had been concerning. The child exhibited signs of severe psychological withdrawal, a common response in young witnesses to violent crimes. How has she been since yesterday? Mueller asked as they approached the house together. Still nonverbal with strangers, Dr. Torres replied, adjusting the canvas bag that held her assessment tools and therapy aids. She's speaking in whispers to her parents, but only when directly questioned about basic needs: food, bathroom, comfort items. No spontaneous speech, no play behavior, and she startles at any unexpected sounds. Jennifer Henderson opened the door before they could knock, her appearance even more haggard than when Detective Santos had visited 2 days earlier. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she gestured them inside. The stress of her daughter's trauma was clearly taking its toll on the entire family. "Thank you both for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma's in her playroom upstairs. We hoped that being in her favorite space might help her feel safer." Mueller noticed immediately how the house felt different from most crime scenes he'd visited. While the physical evidence of the break-in had been cleaned up, the emotional residue lingered like smoke after a fire. Rex, walking calmly beside him on his leather leash, seemed to sense it too. His usual confident gait became more measured, more deliberate. As they climbed the carpeted stairs, Mueller could hear the faint sound of children's music playing, something soft and instrumental that parents often used to soothe upset children. The playroom door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see Emma sitting in a tiny rocking chair, her back to the door, staring out the window at the bird feeder in the backyard. Dr. Torres entered first, her movements slow and non-threatening. "Hello, Emma. I brought the special friend I told your mommy about. Would you like to meet him?" Emma's reaction was subtle but immediate. Her rocking stopped, and though she didn't turn around, Mueller could see her reflection in the window glass. Her eyes had widened with curiosity rather than fear. It was the first positive response anyone had documented since the trauma. Mueller waited at the threshold, allowing Rex to assess the situation. The dog's training kicked in automatically. He lowered his body slightly to appear less imposing. His tail moved in slow, gentle waves rather than enthusiastic wagging, and his breathing became deliberately audible so Emma would know exactly where he was without having to see him. "This is Rex," Mueller said softly, his voice barely above the volume of the background music. "He's a very special dog who helps children who have seen scary things. He's very gentle, and he would like to be your friend if you'd like that too." For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then Emma's small blonde head turned slightly, not enough to look directly at them, but enough to indicate she was listening. Rex, sensing the subtle shift in her attention, took one careful step into the room, and then lay down completely, making himself as non-threatening as possible. The change in Emma was almost magical. She turned in her rocking chair, her blue eyes wide with wonder as she took in Rex's magnificent appearance. German shepherds could be intimidating with their size and alert expressions, but Rex had learned to transform himself into something entirely approachable. His ears relaxed forward, his mouth opened in what could only be described as a gentle smile, and he remained perfectly still, except for the slow, hypnotic waving of his tail. "He's big," Emma whispered, the first words she'd spoken to anyone outside her immediate family since the break-in. Dr. Torres exchanged a meaningful look with Mueller. Breakthrough moments in child trauma therapy were rare and precious, and they both recognized they were witnessing something significant. "Yes, he is big," Dr. Torres agreed gently. "But Rex is very careful with little people. He knows how to be gentle. Would you like to see how soft his fur is?" Emma slid down from her rocking chair, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She approached with the cautious curiosity of a child who wanted to trust but had recently learned that the world could be dangerous. Rex remained motionless, letting her set the pace entirely. When Emma's small hand finally touched Rex's head, the contact seemed to complete an electrical circuit. The tension that had held her small body, rigid for days, began to dissolve. For the first time since the break-in, she smiled. It was tentative, fragile as spun glass, but it was genuine. "He feels like my old teddy bear," she whispered, her fingers moving through Rex's thick fur. Mueller felt his throat tighten with emotion. In 3 years of partnership, he'd seen Rex work with dozens of trauma victims, but there was something particularly moving about watching this brave little girl begin to trust again. Rex, for his part, seemed to understand the significance of the moment. He remained perfectly still, except for the gentle pressure of his head against her small palm. "Rex likes you very much," Mueller said softly. "I can tell because his tail is wagging, but not too much. He doesn't want to scare you." Emma giggled a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as the adults in the room. The spell was breaking, the walls she'd built around herself beginning to crack. Dr. Torres made a note in her mental assessment. The child was ready to begin the healing process, and Rex had just become the key to unlocking whatever memories she carried about that terrible night. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time since the Henderson break-in, everyone in the room felt something they'd almost forgotten: hope. The Multnomah County Circuit Court buzzed with an electric tension that veteran court reporter Margaret Klein hadn't felt in her 23 years of transcribing trials. Local media outlets had dubbed it the silent witness case, and reporters lined the gallery benches like vultures waiting for carrion. The prospect of a 3-year-old taking the witness stand had captured public imagination in a way that typical burglary cases never did. Judge Patricia Williams entered the courtroom with her characteristic measured pace, her black robes flowing behind her like shadows. At 57, she'd presided over countless criminal trials, but the Marcus Webb case presented unique challenges that had kept her awake, reviewing child testimony protocols and consulting with court psychologists. The legal precedents for allowing such young witnesses were murky at best, and the media attention added pressure she could feel like a weight on her shoulders. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Williams," the bailiff announced, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation that had filled the courtroom moments before. District Attorney David Martinez stood at the prosecution table, his expensive charcoal suit and confident posture radiating the kind of assurance that came from building what he considered an airtight case. At 42, Martinez had prosecuted over 300 felony cases and had developed an almost predatory instinct for identifying weakness in opposing arguments. Today, he felt particularly confident. The evidence against Marcus Webb was overwhelming, and public sentiment favored protecting innocent families from career criminals. "Your Honor," Martinez began during his opening statement, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "The evidence in this case will show that the defendant, Marcus Webb, is a career criminal who deliberately targeted the Henderson family. He cased their home under the guise of seeking employment, learned their routines, and then returned in the dark of night to violate their sanctuary and terrorize an innocent child." Martinez gestured toward a large poster board displaying crime. Scene photographs the Hendersons' ransacked bedroom, the pried-open back door, the empty spaces where stolen electronics had once sat. The images were stark, visceral reminders of violation that made several jurors shift uncomfortably in their seats. "The defendant's fingerprints are all over the point of entry," Martinez continued, his voice rising with practiced outrage. "Security cameras place him in the neighborhood at the time of the crime. His criminal history shows a clear pattern of targeting suburban homes. And most damning of all, his alibi relies on the testimony of a girlfriend who initially lied to police to cover for him." At the defense table, Sarah Chun sat beside Marcus Webb, her slight frame dwarfed by the enormity of the case she faced. Her public defender's salary meant she couldn't afford the expensive suits that Martinez wore, but her mind was sharp as a scalpel, honed by years of defending clients that more prestigious attorneys wouldn't touch. She'd spent sleepless nights reviewing every piece of evidence, searching for the crack in the prosecution's seemingly perfect case. Marcus Webb looked smaller than he had during his arrest 3 weeks earlier. The orange jumpsuit of pretrial detention had been replaced by an ill-fitting brown suit borrowed from the public defender's office. But his appearance still carried the weathered look of someone who'd lived rough for too long. His hands, calloused from construction work, remained clasped tightly in his lap as he listened to Martinez systematically destroy his reputation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Chan began when her turn came, her voice quieter than Martinez's, but no less compelling. "The prosecution wants you to believe that circumstantial evidence equals guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They want you to convict my client based on assumptions, coincidences, and the fact that he's made mistakes in his past." Chun moved closer to the jury box, her eyes making contact with each of the 12 men and women who held Marcus Webb's future in their hands. But where are the stolen goods? Where is the crowbar that supposedly pried open that door? Where is any direct evidence that Marcus Webb was inside the Henderson home that night? The courtroom gallery watched the legal chess match unfold with rapt attention. In the third row, Jennifer Henderson sat with her husband David, their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles had turned white. Behind them, Detective Santos observed from the law enforcement section, her trained eye cataloging every gesture, every expression, searching for truth in the theater of justice. "The prosecution will tell you that my client's fingerprints on the back door prove his guilt," Chun continued. "But those same fingerprints could have been left there when he knocked on that door looking for honest work, something he's been desperately seeking as he tries to rebuild his life after years of addiction and poor choices." Judge Williams watched the proceedings with growing unease. The case had all the elements of a standard burglary prosecution, but something felt incomplete. Her experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and those instincts whispered that important pieces of this puzzle remained hidden. Martinez's rebuttal was swift and merciless. "The defense would have you believe that it's mere coincidence that Mr. Webb's fingerprints are on the victim's door, that security cameras captured him in the neighborhood purely by chance, that his changing alibi is simply the result of an overprotective girlfriend. How many coincidences are we expected to accept?" The prosecutor pulled out a timeline chart, meticulously documenting Marcus Webb's movements on the night of the burglary. At 9:47 p.m., he leaves his apartment. At 11:43 p.m., he's captured on camera 3 blocks from the Henderson home. At 2:15 m., the break-in occurs. At 6:30 a.m., he returns to his apartment. Where was he during those crucial hours? His girlfriend, Tanya Rodriguez, initially told police she hadn't seen him that night, only changing her story when she realized he might face serious charges. The weight of evidence seemed insurmountable. Juror number 7, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Patterson, found herself nodding along with Martinez's presentation. The case seemed clear-cut, the kind of open and shut prosecution that allowed justice to move efficiently. But in the back of the courtroom, Dr. Amanda Torres sat with a file folder containing her preliminary assessment of Emma Henderson. The child had made remarkable progress with Rex over the past week, and what she was beginning to share in their therapy sessions didn't align with the case being presented to the jury. "Your Honor," Martinez concluded, "we will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Marcus Webb violated the sanctity of the Henderson home, traumatized an innocent family, and stole their sense of security along with their possessions. The evidence speaks clearly, and it demands justice." As the first day of testimony began, nobody in the courtroom could have predicted that a 3-year-old's whispered words to a therapy dog would soon shatter everything they thought they knew about the case. The wheels of justice were turning, but they were headed in the wrong direction, carrying an innocent man toward conviction, while the real perpetrator remained free. Judge Williams called for a recess, but the tension in the courtroom remained. thick as fog. Justice was supposed to be blind, but sometimes it was also deaf to the voices that mattered most. The child therapy room adjacent to the Multnomah County Courthouse had been specifically designed to feel nothing like a legal environment. Soft beige walls displayed cheerful watercolor paintings of animals and rainbows, a plush carpet in. Calming blues and greens muffled footsteps and voices. A collection of toy stuffed animals, building blocks, art supplies sat arranged on low shelves, carefully chosen to help traumatized children feel safe enough to share their deepest fears. Dr. Amanda Torres had spent the morning preparing the space with meticulous care. She dimmed the overhead fluorescent lights in favor of warm table lamps, positioned child-sized chairs in a non-threatening semicircle, and ensured that Rex would have plenty of room to move freely without overwhelming Emma's personal space. After 2 weeks of therapy sessions, Emma had made remarkable progress, but today would be different. Today, they needed her to remember details that might save an innocent man from prison. Emma Henderson entered the room holding her father's hand, her small fingers gripping his with the intensity of someone afraid of drowning. At 3 years old, she couldn't fully understand the gravity of what was happening, but she sensed the tension that had consumed her family since the break-in. Her blonde hair was neatly braided with purple ribbons, her favorite color, and she wore a simple yellow dress that her mother hoped would make her feel confident and pretty. "Hello, Emma," Dr. Torres said gently, kneeling to the child's eye. "Level, Rex has been waiting to see you. I think he missed you since our last visit." The transformation in Emma's demeanor was immediate and profound. The moment she spotted Rex lying calmly near the window, her grip on her father's hand loosened, and something that resembled joy flickered across her small face. Over the past 2 weeks, Rex had become more than a therapy tool he'd become. Her confidant, the one creature in her world who seemed to understand her fear without judgment. Officer Jake Mueller sat quietly in a corner chair, his presence necessary for legal protocols, but deliberately unobtrusive. He'd watched Rex work with dozens of trauma victims, but Emma's case had affected him more deeply than most. Perhaps it was her age, or the way she whispered secrets to Rex, as if the dog were her most trusted friend, but Mueller found himself genuinely invested in her healing process. Rex, sensing Emma's arrival, remained motionless, except for the gentle wagging of his tail. His training had taught him to let traumatized children approach at their own pace, never forcing interaction, but always remaining available. As Emma settled onto the carpet beside him, her small hand automatically finding the soft spot behind his ears that she discovered during their first meeting, Rex's breathing became deliberately audible, a calming rhythm that had proven therapeutic for anxious children. "Emma," Dr. Torres began carefully, settling cross-legged on the carpet nearby, "I want to talk about the night when the scary man came to your house. I know it's hard to think about, but Rex is here to help you feel brave." Emma's hand stilled in Rex's fur, and her blue eyes grew distant. For several moments, the only sounds in the room were the gentle hum of the air conditioning and Rex's steady breathing. Dr. Torres had learned patience during her 15 years of working with traumatized children. Sometimes the most important breakthroughs came after the longest silences. "He wasn't really scary looking," Emma whispered suddenly, her voice so quiet that Dr. Torres had to lean forward to hear her. "Not like the monsters in my books. He looked like a regular person." Mueller exchanged a meaningful glance with Dr. Torres. This was the first time Emma had volunteered specific details about the intruder's appearance without direct questioning. "Can you tell Rex what the man looked like?" Dr. Torres encouraged. Gently. "Sometimes it's easier to tell our animal friends about scary things." Emma buried her face in Rex's neck, her words muffled by his thick fur. "He was really, really tall. Taller than Daddy. And his hair was yellow like sunshine, not dark like the man in the pictures Mommy showed me." Dr. Torres felt her pulse quicken. Marcus Webb was of average height with dark brown hair, nothing like the description Emma was providing. But she needed to be careful not to lead the child or put words in her mouth. That's very helpful, Emma. What else do you remember about the man? Emma lifted her head from Rex's fur, her eyes meeting the dog's gentle gaze as if drawing strength from his presence. He had a pretty shirt with flowers on it, like the shirts the man wears who comes to fix our garden. The words hung in the air like a revelation. Dr. Torres's mind raced through the case files she'd reviewed. Marcus Webb had been wearing a plain blue work shirt when arrested, and nothing in his wardrobe suggested floral patterns. But more importantly, Emma's reference to someone who comes to fix our garden suggested familiarity with the intruder. Emma, Dr. Torres said carefully, when you say the man who fixes your garden, do you mean someone you've seen before? Emma nodded solemnly, her small fingers tracing patterns in Rex's fur as she gathered courage to continue. He knows my name. When he saw me peeking from the closet, he said, "Hi, Emma," like he was surprised to see me. But not mean surprised, just ... surprised. Mueller leaned forward slightly, his training as a police officer recognizing the significance of Emma's words. A stranger breaking into a house wouldn't know a child's name, wouldn't greet them casually upon discovery. This suggested someone with prior contact with the family. Did the man seem to know your house? Dr. Torres asked. Did he know where things were? Emma's response was immediate and chilling in its clarity. He knew where Mommy keeps the secret. Key under the frog by the door. He didn't have to look for it. And he walked right to Mommy and Daddy's room, like he'd been there before. The room fell silent as the implications of Emma's testimony began to sink in. This wasn't a random crime. That had been presented to the jury. This was someone with intimate knowledge of the Henderson family's routines, someone who'd been in their home before, someone who knew their daughter by name. Dr. Torres glanced at the digital recorder she'd placed discreetly on a nearby table, ensuring that every word of Emma's breakthrough was being documented. But more than evidence, this child's courage in facing her trauma represented something profound, the moment when truth began to surface from the depths of fear. Emma, Dr. Torres said gently, you're being so brave by telling us these things. Is there anything else you remember about that night? Anything else you can tell Rex? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her hands moving rhythmically through Rex's fur, as if the repetitive motion helped her think. He smelled like the flowers in our garden, she said finally. Like when Daddy cuts the grass and it smells all green and fresh. Mueller felt his heart rate accelerate. Emma's description was painting a picture of someone entirely different. For Marcus Webb, someone with access to the Henderson property, someone who worked with plants and soil, someone the family knew well enough to employ regularly. As the session concluded, Dr. Torres knew they'd uncovered something that would change everything. Emma's testimony wasn't the confused recollection of a traumatized toddler. It was the clear, honest account of a child who'd witnessed a crime, committed by someone she recognized, someone who'd violated not just her family's home, but their trust. Rex seemed to sense the importance of the moment. As Emma hugged him goodbye, he remained perfectly still, accepting her embrace with the dignity of a creature who understood his role in helping heal broken spirits. In the coming days, his presence would be needed more than ever as Emma's words echoed through courtrooms and police stations, shattering assumptions and redirecting an investigation that had nearly sent an innocent man to prison. The morning of Emma Henderson's testimony dawned gray and drizzly, Portland's typical October weather casting an appropriately somber mood over the courthouse. Judge Patricia Williams had spent a sleepless night reviewing legal precedents for child witnesses, consulting with court psychologists, and wrestling with the unprecedented decision to allow a 3-year-old to testify in a criminal trial. The media attention had intensified overnight, with news vans lining the courthouse steps and reporters broadcasting live updates about the youngest witness in Oregon legal history. Inside courtroom 4B, tensions ran higher than they had during any previous session of the Marcus Webb trial. The gallery was packed beyond capacity, with overflow observers standing along the back wall, despite the bailiff's repeated warnings about fire code violations. Detective Santos sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, her stomach twisted with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Dr. Torres's preliminary report about Emma's therapy sessions had shaken her confidence in the case she'd helped build. District Attorney David Martinez maintained his outward composure, but privately he was beginning to question the wisdom of allowing a toddler's testimony. His political aspirations depended on maintaining a high conviction rate and high profile. Cases like this one could make or break careers. He'd built his reputation on ironclad evidence and airtight prosecutions, not on the unreliable memories of traumatized children. At the defense table, Sarah Chun felt a surge of hope she hadn't experienced since taking Marcus Webb's case. Her client sat beside her in the same ill-fitting borrowed suit, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't look like a man resigned to his fate. The preliminary reports from Emma's therapy sessions had provided the first crack in the prosecution's seemingly perfect case. "Your Honor," Judge Williams announced, her voice carrying the weight of legal history. "Due to the extraordinary circumstances of this case, I've made the decision to allow testimony from Emma Henderson under special conditions. The witness is 3 years old and has been traumatized by the events in question. Therefore, I'm clearing the courtroom of all media and limiting attendance to essential personnel only." The gallery erupted in protests from reporters and observers, but Judge Williams's gavel restored order quickly. As the courtroom cleared, leaving only the jury, legal teams, court staff, and Emma's immediate family, the atmosphere became simultaneously more intimate and more charged with tension. Rex entered first, his calm presence immediately changing the energy in the room. Officer Mueller guided the therapy dog to a specially positioned cushion near the witness area, where Rex settled with the practiced ease of a professional. Several jurors leaned forward with curiosity. None had ever seen a dog in a courtroom before. Emma appeared in the doorway, holding her mother's hand, her small figure dwarfed by the imposing mahogany panels and high ceilings of the courtroom. She wore a simple blue dress with white flowers, a choice her mother had made hoping it would help Emma feel confident while avoiding anything that might seem calculated to influence the jury. Her blonde hair was pulled back in 2 small ponytails that bounced slightly as she walked. "Hello, Emma," Judge Williams said gently, her usually stern demeanor softening considerably. "This is my courtroom, and you're very brave for coming here today. Do you see your special friend Rex?" Emma's face brightened immediately upon spotting the German Shepherd, and she nodded enthusiastically. Her fear of the unfamiliar environment visibly diminished as she focused on the one familiar, comforting presence in the room. Dr. Torres had worked with the court to establish special protocols for Emma's testimony. Rather than using the traditional witness stand, which would have towered over the child and created additional intimidation, they'd arranged child-sized furniture in an area where Emma could sit near Rex while still being visible to the jury. "Emma," Dr. Torres began gently, taking her place beside the child, "remember what we practiced? You're going to tell these people about the night the man came to your house, just like you told Rex." Emma settled onto the small cushion next to Rex, her tiny hand immediately finding comfort in his fur. The courtroom was so quiet that the soft whir of the air conditioning seemed loud. 12 jurors watched with rapt attention as this unprecedented scene unfolded before them. "Can you tell us about the man you saw that night?" Dr. Torres encouraged. Emma's voice, when it came, was clear and steady despite her age. "He was really tall, much taller than my daddy. and he had hair like sunshine, all yellow and bright. Marcus Webb, sitting 20 feet away, instinctively touched his own dark brown hair. Several jurors noticed the gesture, and their expressions began to shift from certainty to confusion. The man had a pretty shirt with flowers all over it, Emma continued, her confidence growing as she spoke to the familiar faces of Dr. Torres. And Rex, like the shirts that Mr. Tony wears when he comes to make our flowers pretty. The name hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. District Attorney Martinez felt his confident case beginning to crumble, while Sarah Chun struggled to maintain her professional composure. This wasn't random testimony. Emma was identifying someone specific, someone with a name. Emma, Dr. Torres said carefully, when you say Mr. Tony, do you mean someone you know? Yes, Emma replied matter-of-factly. He comes to our house to fix the flowers and cut the grass. He knows where Mommy keeps the secret key under the frog, and he knows my name. When he saw me in the closet, he said, "Hi, Emma," like he was surprised but not mad. The implications rippled through the courtroom like an earthquake. This wasn't a stranger breaking into an unfamiliar house. This was someone with legitimate access, someone the family trusted, someone who knew their routines and their daughter. Did Mr. Tony seem to know his way around your house? Dr. Torres asked. Oh, yes, Emma nodded emphatically. He walked right to Mommy and Daddy's room without looking around, and he knew where Daddy keeps his computer. He didn't have to search for anything. Judge Williams watched the jury's faces transform from conviction to doubt to growing belief that they might be witnessing the testimony that would free an innocent man. The child's clarity, her specific details, and her obvious familiarity with the person she was describing created a credibility that couldn't be manufactured or coached. Marcus Webb felt tears building in his eyes for the first time since his arrest. This brave little girl was giving him back his freedom with words spoken in perfect innocence, describing a truth that adult investigators had somehow missed. Emma. Dr. Torres continued gently, is there anything else you remember about that night with Mr. Tony? Emma was quiet for a moment, stroking Rex's fur as she thought. He smelled like the flowers in our garden, and his hands were dirty, like when he's been working in the dirt. He took Mommy's pretty necklace and Daddy's computer, but he was very quiet. I think he didn't want to wake anybody up. The courtroom remained silent as Emma's testimony concluded, but the silence was pregnant with the weight of revelation. A 3-year-old child, with the help of a therapy dog and the patient guidance of a skilled psychologist, had just dismantled a prosecution case that had seemed unshakable and pointed toward a perpetrator that no one had considered. Judge Williams knew that legal history was being made in her courtroom, and that the reverberations of this moment would be felt far beyond the Marcus Webb case. Sometimes justice came from the most unexpected sources, delivered by the smallest voices, speaking truth that adults had somehow failed to hear. Detective Maria Santos sat in her car outside the courthouse, rain drumming against the windshield, as Emma Henderson's testimony echoed in her mind like a haunting melody. 15 years of police work had taught her to trust evidence over instinct. But today, a 3-year-old child had shattered everything she thought she knew about the case. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone to call the precinct, not from the cold October air, but from the realization that they might have been hours away from convicting an innocent man. Bradley, it's Santos, she said when her partner answered. Drop everything. We need to pull every landscaping invoice, every service record, every contractor receipt the Hendersons have from the past year. Emma identified someone named Tony, who works on their property. This isn't random. We're looking for someone with legitimate access to the house. Back at Central Precinct, Detective Tom Bradley was already spreading files across the conference room table like a crime scene photographer, documenting evidence. The Henderson family's financial records, obtained through court order weeks earlier, had been reviewed for large cash withdrawals or unusual spending patterns. Nobody had thought to examine the routine expenses, the gardeners, pool cleaners, and handymen who formed the invisible infrastructure of suburban life. "Here," Bradley announced, pulling a crumpled receipt from a manila folder. "Sunshine Landscaping Services. $280 for spring garden renovation. Paid April 15th. Property owner, Anthony Tony Reeves, registered business address in Beaverton." Santos felt her pulse quicken as she drove toward the address, windshield wipers struggling against the increasing rain. Tony Reeves, 6'2" according to his business license, blonde hair in his driver's license photo, and a landscaping company that specialized in residential properties in affluent neighborhoods. Everything Emma had described with the crystalline clarity that only truth could provide. The apartment complex where Reeves lived was a far cry from the manicured neighborhoods where he worked. Weathered buildings with peeling paint-housed residents who struggled to make rent each month, a stark contrast to the Henderson family's comfortable suburban prosperity. Santos noted the irony as she climbed the exterior stairs to apartment 2B. The man who maintained other people's beautiful gardens lived in a place where weeds grew through cracks in the concrete. She knocked on the door with the practiced authority of someone who'd made thousands of such visits, her badge ready, but her weapon still holstered. When Tony Reeves answered, Santos immediately understood why Emma had remembered him so clearly. He was indeed tall, with sun-bleached hair and the lean build of someone who worked outdoors. But what struck her most was his immediate reaction, not surprise or confusion, but the unmistakable flash of guilty recognition that experienced detectives learned to read like a roadmap to truth. "Anthony Reeves?" Santos said, though she already knew the answer from his body language. "Yeah, that's me," Reeves replied, his voice carefully controlled, but his eyes darting past her to the parking lot as if calculating escape routes. "What's this about?" "I'm Detective Santos with Portland Police. I'd like to ask you some questions about your work at the Henderson residence on Maple Street." The color drained from Reeves's face like water from a broken dam. His hand tightened on the doorframe, and Santos could see the rapid pulse beating in his neck. After 20 years of landscaping work, Tony Reeves had developed calloused hands and a sun-weathered face, but he'd never learned to hide his emotions under pressure. "I do a lot of houses," he said weakly. "I can't remember every customer." Santos stepped closer, her trained eye cataloging details that might become evidence. Reeves wore a Hawaiian shirt with tropical flowers, exactly the type of pretty flower shirt that Emma had described. His hands bore the soil stains of recent garden work, and the faint scent of fertilizer and grass clippings clung to his clothes. Like an accusation. "Mr. Reeves, I'm going to need you to come with me to the station for questioning. You're not under arrest at this time, but I strongly advise you to cooperate." As they walked toward her vehicle, Santos's radio crackled with updates from the search warrant team that had been dispatched to Reeves's apartment. "Detective Santos, you need to see this. We've got multiple items matching the Henderson theft inventory." Inside Tony Reeves's cramped living room, the stolen Henderson property sat in plain sight like trophies from a successful hunt. Jennifer Henderson's pearl necklace lay coiled on the coffee table beside David Henderson's laptop computer. A Sony entertainment system, still in its original packaging, occupied most of one wall. The arrogance of keeping the stolen goods so visibly suggested either supreme confidence or the desperate carelessness of someone drowning in problems. At the police station, Reeves's confession came in broken pieces, like a dam failing under pressure. The interrogation room's harsh fluorescent lights revealed every line of stress on his face as he described the mounting gambling debts that had driven him to betray his client's trust. "I never meant for it to happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been doing their landscaping for 8 months. Mrs. Henderson always left lemonade for me, asked about my family. They were good people, and I violated that. Detective Bradley leaned forward across the metal table. Tell us about the night of the burglary, Tony. Walk us through what happened. Reeves's hands shook as he described using his intimate knowledge of the Henderson property to plan the perfect crime. I knew they'd be out of town for the wedding. Mrs. Henderson mentioned it weeks earlier when we were planning the fall plantings. I knew about the spare key under the decorative frog by the back door. I knew the layout of their house, their routines, where they kept valuable items. And the little girl? Santos asked, her voice harder now. You traumatized a 3-year-old child. Reeves's face crumpled with genuine remorse. I thought everyone was gone. When I saw Emma peeking out from the closet, I said hello to her like I was just there for work. She knows me, trusts me. I've given her strawberries from their garden, helped her plant flowers in her little patch of dirt. The confession continued for 2 hours, each detail corroborating Emma's testimony with devastating accuracy. Reeves described his careful movements through the house, his selection of easily portable valuable items, and his shock at discovering that the innocent child he'd come to care for during his work visits had witnessed his ultimate betrayal. I wore gloves the whole time, he admitted. I knew about fingerprints, DNA evidence, but I never thought about a 3-year-old's memory, about how clearly children see the world. As the paperwork was completed, and Tony Reeves was formally charged with residential burglary, Detective Santos reflected on the case that had nearly gone catastrophically wrong. Marcus Webb, innocent of everything except the bad luck of knocking on the wrong door at the wrong time, would be released within hours. But the real lesson came from Emma Henderson, a child whose courage and honesty had saved a man she'd never met and exposed a truth that experienced investigators had somehow missed. Outside the precinct, the rain had stopped, and late afternoon. Sunlight broke through the clouds like a metaphor for justice finally emerging from confusion. Detective Santos drove toward the courthouse to deliver the news that would free Marcus Webb, carrying with her a renewed respect for the unexpected, sources from which truth sometimes emerges. 6 months after Tony Reeves's sentencing to 8 years in Oregon State Penitentiary, the Multnomah County Courthouse had returned to its normal rhythm of traffic violations and civil disputes. But on this crisp April morning, something extraordinary was happening in the same courtroom where Emma Henderson had made legal history. Judge Patricia Williams was presenting a special commendation to the youngest witness ever to testify in an Oregon criminal trial. Emma Henderson, now 3.5, bounded into the courtroom with the infectious energy of a child who had fully recovered from trauma. Her blonde hair bounced in carefully styled ringlets, and she wore a bright yellow sundress that matched her restored sunny disposition. The transformation from the silent, withdrawn child of 6 months ago was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the resilience of youth and the power of proper therapeutic intervention. Rex entered beside Officer Jake Mueller, his tail wagging with the dignified enthusiasm of a dog who understood this was a celebration. The German Shepherd had gained 15 pounds since the trial, the result of grateful families sending treats and donations to the Portland Police K-9 unit. His story had been featured in national media, making him something of a celebrity in law enforcement circles, though he remained focused on his primary mission of helping traumatized victims find their voices. Emma Henderson, Judge Williams, announced from the bench, her usually stern demeanor softened by a genuine smile. For your courage in speaking the truth and helping our justice system work as it should, the state of Oregon presents you with this certificate of civic heroism. Emma giggled as she approached the bench, holding tightly to her mother's hand, but showing none of the fear that had once paralyzed her. Jennifer Henderson looked years younger than she had during the trial, the stress lines around her eyes replaced by laugh lines that reflected her family's healing journey. Your Honor, Emma said in her clear, piping voice. "Can Rex get a certificate too? He helped me be brave." The courtroom erupted in gentle laughter, and Judge Williams's smile broadened. "I think that's an excellent idea, Emma. Rex, for your service in helping victims find their courage, you are hereby awarded the Portland Police Department's Medal of Valor." Mueller stepped forward to receive Rex's medal, his own eyes glistening with emotion. In his 8 years as a K-9 officer, he'd never experienced a case that illustrated so perfectly why therapy dogs were essential to modern law enforcement. Rex had done more than comfort a traumatized child. He'd helped save an innocent man and catch a criminal who might have continued preying on trusting families. In the gallery, Marcus Webb sat with his girlfriend, Tanya Rodriguez, both of them still adjusting to his freedom and the public attention that had followed his exoneration. The wrongful prosecution had changed his life in unexpected ways. Victim advocacy groups had helped him find stable employment with a construction company that specialized in hiring formerly incarcerated individuals, and his story had become a powerful example of why the justice system needed constant vigilance against rushing to judgment. "I can't ever thank Emma enough," Webb said quietly to a reporter from the Portland Tribune. "A little girl I'd never even met gave me back my life. She's braver than any adult I know." Detective Maria Santos watched the ceremony from her usual spot in the law enforcement section, reflecting on how the case had changed her approach to investigations. The Emma Henderson case had become required reading at the Portland Police Academy, studied as an example of how assumptions could derail justice and how the most unlikely witnesses might hold the keys to truth. Santos had been promoted to detective sergeant, partly based on her handling of the case's dramatic reversal, but she remained haunted by how close they'd come to convicting an innocent man. Dr. Amanda Torres sat nearby, her professional pride tempered by the knowledge that Emma's recovery was ongoing. Child trauma therapy was a marathon, not a sprint, but Emma had made remarkable progress. The nightmares had stopped 3 months ago. Her appetite had returned to normal, and she'd begun playing with friends again. Most importantly, she'd learned that speaking truth, even when it was scary, could protect innocent people and help catch bad ones. "Dr. Torres," Emma had said during their final session the previous week, "will Rex come visit me, even though I'm not scared anymore?" The question had made Torres smile. Rex would indeed continue visiting Emma, but now as a friend rather than a therapeutic necessity. The bond between them had transcended its original purpose, becoming one of those rare connections that reminded everyone involved why they'd chosen careers dedicated to helping others. Tony Reeves watched the ceremony on a small television in the prison recreation room, his gambling addiction finally under control thanks to mandatory counseling and the structured environment of incarceration. He'd written letters to the Henderson family, letters that would never be sent, but served as part of his therapeutic process, expressing remorse for betraying their trust and traumatizing their daughter. His crime had cost him his business, his freedom, and his reputation. But the hardest part remained knowing that Emma Henderson would always remember him as the man who'd shattered her sense of safety. As the formal ceremony concluded, Emma made her way to Rex, settling beside him on the courtroom floor with the easy familiarity of old friends. She whispered something in his ear that made his tail wag faster, then looked up at the assembled crowd with perfect confidence. "Rex wants everyone to know," she announced solemnly, "that telling the truth is the most important thing, even when it's scary. He told me that when we first met, and now I'm telling you." The wisdom in her words, delivered with the guileless honesty that only children possess, resonated through the courtroom like a benediction. Emma Henderson had taught a room full of adults that justice sometimes came from the smallest voices, delivered with the help of a patient dog and the courage to speak truth regardless of consequences. Judge Williams gavelled the ceremony to a close, but the lessons would continue reverberating through the legal system for years to come. In law schools across the country, professors would teach the Emma Henderson case as an example of how children's testimony, properly supported and carefully evaluated, could serve justice in ways that traditional investigation methods might miss. As the courtroom emptied, Emma Henderson skipped toward the exit, holding her certificate, her family surrounding her with protective love, and Rex walking beside her with the quiet dignity of a hero who had simply done his job. They stepped out into the Portland sunshine, where the future waited bright with possibilities, a future where truth had triumphed, innocence had been protected, and a brave little girl had learned that her voice mattered more than she'd ever imagined. The Marcus Webb case was officially closed, but its legacy would live on in every courtroom that remembered to listen carefully to voices that seemed too small to matter, and in every investigation that took time to hear truth from unexpected sources.